So, good morning, everybody, and it's my pleasure to welcome Ms. Kriya Shortt, who is the President and CEO of TEXTRON eAviation, and I will look forward to her and she will introduce her colleagues, and we'll have a very interesting discussion this morning about ethics in the aviation industry.
All right, thank you, Dean Zarb. First of all, apologies for being late. I pride myself on being on time. That's probably one of my own frustrations. So, and thank you for being patient with us as we wrapped up the last session and used the facilities. And thank you for coming out on such a rainy day. It would be easy to want to sleep in today. As Dean Zarb said, I am Kriya Shortt. I lead TEXTRON eAviation, and I've been an executive in residence here at Embry-Riddle. This is my second year, so I'm either a rising sophomore or a rising senior, or actually both, because at the end of the spring semester, we'll pass the baton to somebody else in industry who will hopefully pick up and do I'm sure, far superior than I've done for you all. But it's a privilege to be here. I always enjoy being on campus. And this year, as we approached the program, we thought about how we could really change things and level up. And so I'm really proud to have two of my wonderful colleagues here for this conversation. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and give a little bit of perspective on their careers so that it will ground us as we have the conversations.
Hey, good morning. Nick Begley, I'm the Director of Finance for TEXTRON eAviation. I work with Kriya and Flectch across the same portfolio of business. I started with Raytheon Aircraft 20 years ago. I've never really changed jobs, but I've worked for, I think, 5 different companies and 5 completely different leadership groups just because the world we have in mergers, acquisitions, etc. I moved to eAviation in 2022 because at the time when the eAviation segment was being formed, it was a pretty small team. And I actually had a background in both finance, and about half my career is program management on both the merger and acquisition side, but also aircraft programs. So aircraft is the Hawker 4000, King Air, Caravan. I've been a program manager for those. So I was brought in to kind of bring both perspectives. Had a lot of fun the last 3 years, and continue to work well with this team.
I am Flectch Thomson, General Counsel at TEXTRON eAviation. I have been a lawyer for about 23 years. I had a career in private practice where I focused on litigation and intellectual property. I was in private practice for about 9 years and then joined TEXTRON in 2012. I've been with the corporate office for a period of time. I did a stint as the general counsel of one of the TEXTRON companies that's headquartered in Bonn, Germany, and I've been with TEXTRON eAviation since 2022. I have a law degree from the U.S. and another law degree from Europe, and this has been a great opportunity to work with colleagues both in the U.S. and with our companies in Europe. So it's really been a great opportunity to work with my colleagues in the industry.
Fantastic. Well, today's topic is really around ethics in business. And I would just say from the standpoint of wherever you sit in a corporation, there's always great support, but 2 of your greatest supports are always going to come from the finance world and from the legal world relative to kind of the decisions or the quandaries that you're facing. So we've put together some questions today. We'll probably have to go a little bit fast since we did get a late start. So I won't go through all of my questions because we want to respect that even though we've thought of these, we may not have thought of all the questions that are most important to you. So please, we'll reserve some time at the end for you to ask questions of us regarding the things that you're curious about around ethics. So let's talk first about kind of how you ensure that ethics are part of your company and corporate culture. So Fletch, how does being part of the TEXTRON enterprise impact TEXTRON eAviation's ethics and compliance practices?
Sure. So TEXTRON's a global Fortune 500 company, and like most large companies, they have a code of conduct. We have what's called the TEXTRON Code of Conduct, which deals with how we're to ethically deal with all of our customers, our suppliers, regulators, employees. And so as part of the larger TEXTRON, we adhere to that code of conduct. It's really a roadmap for how to do business ethically. Some of the benefits of being part of a larger company, for example, they have a lot of different resources. We have working groups of lawyers and ethics and regulatory folks. So as regulations change around the world, for example, in supply chain, there are things about conflict minerals, or making sure that you're not buying supplies from companies that use slave labor in China, or a lot of the other issues. We have colleagues at the other businesses who help us to stay on top of those regulations so that we're in compliance. The only other thing I'd mention is we have something called the TEXTRON helpline, which is it's an anonymous telephone number that anyone in the company can call if they know of an ethical concern. And we have a policy of no retaliation. So if you see something, we ask that you say something, whether it has to do with some dangerous condition in your workplace. Hey, there's a cord on the ground that somebody might trip over, or you see somebody and say, hey, there's some fraud, or someone's treating someone else in a bad way. You can make an anonymous call, and you'll be listened to. You don't have to give your name, but that's something that TEXTRON gives us. So when you're reporting ethical concerns, you not only can come to, say, your boss, you can come to someone who's not even within eAviation, and there's an opportunity to kind of report on.
Thank you for that question. I think, hopefully that's something that, as you're here at Embry-Riddle, you're already feeling, and that will be consistent no matter what company you go to work for, which is really around kind of, as Embry-Riddle has signs that are posted the same way. If you see something, say something. So you're being grounded today in kind of looking for those things that will also impact you when you enter into the workforce. And so, I think to underscore Fletch's point, that the helpline matters are all followed up on, and either substantiated or not substantiated. And that is information that doesn't just stay. It stays confidential always. So it's not the who that is ever talked about; it's the what. But the what is talked about. So as officers of eAviation, we meet quarterly to understand how that has impacted our business segment. It's talked about at the enterprise level across the various segments, and ultimately our board of directors, who are independent of TEXTRON, also have insight into those matters. And so again, as a publicly traded company, as a Fortune 500 company, that's absolutely important to us that we're able to conduct our business completely ethically and with integrity.
Right, and so we talk about things like tone from the top. We want to make sure that whenever Kriya is talking, or I'm talking, or Nick, or any of the other sort of senior leaders, whether it's an all-hands meeting where we have the whole company get together and we report out on what's going on, that we speak about ethical issues so that people understand that it's operational, it's not just sort of aspirational, right? That we're going to make sure that ethics is a part of what we do. And then on the helpline, just something I would note, people think, well, hey, you have this helpline, it'd be great if nobody ever called, because that would mean that there aren't any problems in your company. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. We hope and expect that someone is going to have something that they want to report, whether it's perceived or an actual issue. And so when we get reports, we take them seriously, but it also is an indication to us that there's a feedback loop in place, that people feel comfortable culturally in reporting things because they think something will come of it. If we had a helpline and no one ever called, I think that would be a problem, because in any situation, there's always something that someone finds irritating, or something that can be improved. So we want to make sure that we hear from folks.
Thanks for that, Fletch. All right, anybody out here accounting or finance majors or focuses? Okay, we got one. So I obviously, Nick, balance sheets are important. Accounting principles exist and are regulated. So how do you incorporate ethics into financial planning and decision making?
So the reality is we use a lot of tools and processes to make sure we're looking for things that could be not being done ethically. There are times where you're like, oh, this is an ethical issue, and when you realize you're in one, you kind of think about what your customers will think, what your team's going to think, what your leadership going to think, but also the grandma test, what my grandmother think about this situation if I make choice A or choice B. But most of the time, what we face ethically are little small decisions that add up to a really incorrect answer, whether it is in a forecast or in the reality of what our balance sheet should be. So we use a lot of tools and processes to try to prevent that. For instance, there's delegations of authority. So whether it's making a commitment on behalf of the company to do something, or to buy something, or to sell something, Those types of things have delegations of authority, so not any one individual is taking on too much risk on their own. We also kind of separate certain activities. So while finance and accounting both report to myself for eAviation, the financial planning analysis folks and the business partner folks, they do a lot of the analysis and the forward-looking projections, and they look at the history and the key performing indicators, and they try to project that forward and make a forecast. But the accounting side of the team actually looks at, okay, based on these contracts, based on these events, what was our P&L, what was our balance sheet, final ending statement, and then they, after they're done, then you compare where the variances are. Where was the finance team correct in their projections? Where were they incorrect? Do we understand what those differences are? And if the differences have a magnitude to them and are questionable, then you go back and look into what happened. Furthermore, even within, since Sarbanes-Oxley and Enron, there's basically a separation from the executive branch of leadership of the company. I fully support Kriya on an hourly, and her team on an hourly basis. But for making sure that the accounting is correct, all CFOs of large companies such as TEXTRON report to the controller. So the controller of a company is always making sure that we're auditing ourselves, that our accounting is accurate. And so they even pull someone like myself and my team. Our dotted line or our org chart actually goes up to within finance, not necessarily the executive branch. So consistent processes that are looking for variances, separation of activities, and making sure that you understand when things don't come out the way you expected them to. You understand are they for legitimate reasons or not. Those are the kind of the key things that finance and accounting teams are doing on a daily basis.
I love that. Thanks, Nick. And I can attest to a question for you. Do you think that people can inadvertently commit the company to something? Is a verbal agreement a commitment?
Depends what country you're in. sometimes it's not. It's not. So there's a lot of training for that I'll team up with someone like Flectch on what we I'll use the term backdoor selling. So suppliers and different partners will do their best to kind of work around the system and find somebody in the company that they can engage with and they can make a commitment by that wouldn't follow the natural processes that would vet that person, make sure that they're actually a good actor, make sure they're a compliant actor, kind of like go back to some of the, where materials are sourced or how business is conducted. Those types of things happen all the time. We're always, training and retraining that, hey, there's a right way to do things that protect you and the company and your customers and shareholders in the long run. And so there's a huge emphasis on that.
Yeah, there's a concept in law called apparent authority, where, trying to think from law, assent, benefit, and control. So somebody who looks like they represent the company could inadvertently commit them to something. And so a lot of the training about, talking about DOA, delegation of authority, who has the authority to sign for TEXTRON, who can kind of make deals, is something we work on very hard, because we don't want to inadvertently get in a situation where we say, hey, well, Joe said this, and he's your supply chain guy, and so we have a deal now.
Yeah, I think, it comes down to, and again, I asked that question kind of as an audible because I think it's real world applicable, right? Everybody wants to be helpful, and I always like to operate that. Most people are operating within doing the right thing. Your intent is good, but the impact can be negative, right? Unbeknownst to you. So again, I think, the situation is whether or not it's a contractual risk or a real risk. It could also be a reputational risk, because when you are badged, whatever company you go to work for, and you speak or you put something into an email or into a text, that all becomes discoverable. And even if you aren't within the delegation of authority, that's creating a workflow and work stream that is additive to the situation for those areas that have to go back and kind of defend that. And it can become real risk in some regards as well.
Yeah, I know it's good to note that we do a lot of training about what's called careful communications.
That was going to be my next question, was tell us about okay, we talked about the business,
sure.
And we talked about the code of conduct, which sounds like general principles that kind of guide you. You talked about some of the training. So talk more specifically about, okay, if I have the code of conduct, how do we talked about this training. What does that look like at TEXTRON and TEXTRON eAviation, so that I, as an individual contributor or leader, know more specifically
Sure.
how I'm operating.
Yeah, so we look at different areas of compliance. I'll give an example would be bribery, right? The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that American companies are subject to, and other, there are equivalents around the world, or just even commercial bribery, right? So in business, you may have somebody who wants to take you out for dinner, or they might send you a gift at a holiday time, or they say, hey, I got tickets to see the Jets, or I don't know, Florida Panther. I don't know
Why
what.
would you want to?
So the Fort KU basketball game, or we'll put the airplane.
Right, exactly. And so we have rules around that so that it helps everyone to make sure they don't get into bad situations, but it also provides sort of guardrails, right? So our gift policy, for example, we, employees are allowed to accept gifts if they're under a certain dollar amount and they report them, and if they're not given or received with the intent to influence a business judgment, right? And so that's an important rule. And beyond the kind of legal aspects of it, it's good to have rules in place because it gives you a backstop, right? So if your parents said, hey, you have a curfew at midnight, and you're out with your buddies, and I know you guys are in college, but imagine you're in high school, and they're like, oh, well, let's go do this, blah, blah. In the back of your head, you may not want to do that. You can always rely on the fact your parents said you had to get back in by midnight and say, oh, my dad's a real hard on this. I'd love to, but I can't. And so we give those tools to our employees so they don't have to worry about when they're asked, hey, do you want to go to the Super Bowl or whatever. So that's the type of thing. One other thing, careful communications. So much of what we do is done with texts or emails or Snapchat or whatever it is. And you have to be careful because the context of things that are written, it might be a joke or something else. If you end up in litigation 5 years from now, somebody might pull up an email and try to take it out of context. So we train people that you want to be factual in emails. You don't want to make promises because you could end up with with liability legally. You don't want to say, hey, there's a defect in X. Or jump to conclusions, because again, anything you write down, you have to assume it will last forever. It's just like everything you put on the internet is there forever. And so that's the type of training that we do, and it goes down the line. I can talk about it for hours.
Side note, as a mom, I will
Yeah.
say, as you think about entering the workforce, no matter what your social media profile is personally, it's also really important to keep those lines separated. I mean, obviously, you represent wholly when you're at work, but you can't really separate that. So I always like to remind people that somehow, somewhere, some way, somebody is probably connected to you socially, and that can come back into the workplace. So always think about how and what and you're posting, and does it align to ultimately your personal brand, not only of who you are today, but who you want to be in the future. So that's just a mom. That's freebie. You can throw that away or not. But I think it is important to think about global operations and cultural sensitivity. So most companies in today's environment have some kind of global impact. They may have global teams. We certainly do across the TEXTRON enterprise, and specifically with TEXTRON eAviation. You heard Nick say it depends on what country you're in. So we have a company that's based in Slovenia and Italy. We also have a company that's based in Germany, and then we have our headquarters out of Wichita. So as you think about that, let's talk to the group about how we navigate kind of cultural and regulatory differences, and how ethics can come into play there, and even in terms of different kind of cultural contexts. So maybe you guys can provide a couple of examples that kind of firm that in a real world environment, so that the group can consider those.
Okay, so I think it. I have 2 phones. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we have to have sort of local sensitivity to the different cultures and the places, Slovenia, Germany, Wichita, Kansas, those sorts of things, to make sure that we have an understanding, because when we're trying to communicate with employees, it's important to kind of meet them where they are, to understand where they're coming from. So I find that it's important to kind of talk to my colleagues who are local and get constructive feedback. I do a lot of live training. I want to make sure that what I'm saying is getting across to them, and if there are things that are specific to their countries. At the same time, you have to have ethical consistency. So we have rules that are the same across the board, but how do you kind of adapt them to a particular place? And I think that becomes easier to deal with folks when they understand, hey, there's a particular rule here. And there are sensitive issues that come up, like gift policy. I was talking about, the Super Bowl, but in some jurisdictions, there are, it's common to receive gifts around the holidays. And how do you deal with that, right? In Slovenia, for example, they send huge gift baskets with wine and sausage and all manner of things. And how do we not offend the people who would give those gifts, but by the same time, stick to our ethical concerns? Another thing that comes up from an export compliance standpoint is we have employees from all over the world. With the technologies that we're dealing with, there are different export rules, right? There are certain countries that people can come from where you cannot share certain, high-tech information without a proper license. And so when we talk about who can have access to things, it's important to be able to show, hey, there's a policy here. We're not singling you out, right? So you're from Brazil or you're from some other country that the U.S. has a higher standard for sharing certain dual-use technology with. We want to make sure that we're explaining to them so that they feel okay about it. You want the example? All right. So just to give you an example of how we dealt with a particular situation at one of our locations, we noticed when we went there that they had bikini calendars up everywhere. And you walk around in professional offices and even in in the production areas, and that is that's not sort of consistent with a professional work environment. It could, for some people, they could find that, and we would in America find that to be sort of not a welcoming environment where you're objectifying women. The reality is that in that culture, that is still sort of a norm. They're probably 20 or 30 years or 40 years behind us. And to give you an example, even in government buildings, when I was talking to the folks on the ground, they said, hey, you go to the government industry, the FAA equivalent, and they have these same calendars on the walls. And so how do you explain to them, hey, ethically, we're not going to allow this in our business, but not sort of offend them in the sense that you don't want to be cultural imperialism. Hey, an American company bought you, and all of a sudden you have to believe everything that America does. That would take too long, and I don't want to get into that. I personally, I have a daughter. It's totally inappropriate. But how do you? So the way that we focused it is said, hey, we're an international company now. We have people from all over the world coming to visit us as customers, suppliers, employees. We want to make sure that because you spend a third of your time at work, that everyone feels comfortable and welcomed, and there's no sort of discrimination associated with this sort of situation. So we're not going to allow that here. I'm not going to make a judgment on what you do in your own house, but that's the rule here. And we were able to get buy-in because that's the way that we kind of explained it to them. If we had gone in and said, well, we're an American company, this is our policy, you're not doing this, we would have had a lot of backlash, which is not helpful to the employee morale. So we got to the place we needed to, being truthful about some of the reasons why we did. And hopefully over time, it helps instill sort of values that are more traditionally Western or consistent with equal rights.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's a real conversation, right? In any work environment, no matter the culture, the reality is that it's improbable that you're going to have a homogeneous team, right? We have multiple generations in the workforce. We have multiple and diverse cultures and backgrounds and experiences. And I think in this scenario, even though the company was based in a specific culture and the predominance of the employees come from that culture, to Fletch's point, and kind of some of the questions we've had earlier, there were people who felt uncomfortable. And so the final question I'm going to ask before we open it up to the floor is, let's talk about, you talked about no retaliation, right? And so how do you really create a culture of transparency and communication in underscoring the importance of ethics and reliability. So what can we do, what are we doing, and how do we provide this group assurances that as they enter into the workforce, as long as, to the best of, being part of TEXTRON and other companies that are publicly traded, what should their expectations be?
So I think, again, and I think I said it earlier, it's not just aspirational, it has to be operational. So you have a tone from the top, so the leaders are talking about these issues of ethics, and this is the way that we're going to do it, even under pressure, right? We're not going to take shortcuts that are ethically or regulatorily inappropriate just for expediency, even though we're a publicly traded company that reports on a quarterly basis. Reputation and doing the right thing is important. Then we have the live training that, when we have all hands, as I said earlier, there's always a message, right? We're always sending out a message of ethics and live training. I go and personally I've trained hundreds of folks, and I think it's important to have a senior person go and actually do that training and answer questions as opposed to just doing it online or sending out a notice. But then there's the feedback, right? So we do confidential surveys, we do surveys after all hands meetings, we make sure that people sign certifications every year that they know things. And so there's a way that, that there's a feedback loop. And the last example I'll give is we had a call to the hotline recently, and for some reason someone was raising a concern that they decided halfway through to stop. They just hung up. Now we could say this is unsubstantiated because we don't know exactly if it was a business unit, we don't know exactly what they were trying to report. But what we did was we tried to understand what do we think they were saying. And so I wrote an article for our newsletter that goes to our entire enterprise group, just addressing that issue in general. So even though this person, hung up the phone, maybe they see that and they say, well, they were listening even if I didn't get all the way through. And so there has to be a continuous feedback of us reporting down, people reporting up, and then us acknowledging the voices when something does come up.
Thanks for that. Nick, anything to add from your
So,
side?
yeah, just a couple things. One would be, how we start every key review is important. So we start with, safety and quality and really looking at the number of reports that came in, and not just what were the reports, but what was done about it and have we been able to resolve anything that, was maybe a quality compliance issue or a safety issue, or even a near miss. Hey, somebody said maybe that rug might, when it gets wet, people can trip on it. And we did something about it. So that's kind of, starting with action related to the reports and making that the focus is super important. As a finance person, you'll just see in any key review, finance is usually the last topic because you're wanting to make sure operationally you're actually doing all the right things and you're emphasizing doing business and building airplanes and supporting them in the correct way. The other kind of key thing is just, how you act day to day. Try to never shoot the messenger. Right? Okay, somebody brought you bad news or questionable news or just needed a clarification. You have to react the right way to that. And my focus is to try to make sure I'm acting the right way, even if it's news I didn't want to hear or it doesn't help us achieve our goals. Is okay. Well, why did that happen? How can we prevent that happening? What steps would prevent that from happening? So getting solutions oriented or corrective action oriented versus focusing on who caused it or why who missed part of the forecast. It's more about how would we see this in the future? How would we better align? And how would we better work together in the future to prevent this? And when you do that consistently, people are much more likely to bring up issues that aren't as formal as calling the ethics hotline or writing a safety report, but just saying, hey, notice something, can we talk about it? And if you respond correctly, they'll keep doing it.
Right, yeah, so it's a speak-up culture, and we try to, the training is not just, hey, I feel like something's happened to me. If I think Joe's bullying Matt, I have an obligation to speak up because maybe Matt doesn't want to say anything, but we want to make the whole environment better.
To that point, do we have any aspiring professional pilots or maintainers in the audience this morning? Yeah, that's a great congratulations to you all, and thank you. I think that's an important point to note as well, because again, it's not just the companies that are really held accountable to ethics and compliance, but our regulatory bodies do as well, right? And so in the US as well as in Europe, have you all heard of SMS? SMS is becoming formalized, and so it can have aspects of being part of a crew in the cockpit and how you conduct yourself in the cockpit with your, as an FO or as a captain. It also has application in the maintainer world, and so in some of your courses you might hear Flectch refers to it as a speak up culture. You might also hear it referred to as a just culture. And so this is something that is being put into place. It's, I would say it's probably been informally in place, but now it's being memorialized in the regulatory bodies. And companies and operators will be held accountable to it. So as you're hearing that term, that's really what that's meaning. All right, we want to respect you and leave some time for Q&A. I think Dean Zarb has a microphone, so those of us who've been in the industry for 30 years need that little bit of help.
Questions?
How do you hear me? With the rise of general aviation, let's say aviation might not be enough to offset the sheer industry need. So in that case, would you guys say it's more ethical to prioritize the industry need by kind of continuing with adding more flights, even though it might disrupt that sustainable culture, or would you kind of limit the flights? Yeah.
Are you when you say limit the flights, are you talking about arrivals and departures at airports, or help us give us a little more context, if you could?
So yeah, kind of that, and just like, would you compromise the sustainable aircraft and favor more just general aircrafts like fuel and stuff?
I'll start maybe and have you add in. So I think, from a TEXTRON perspective, we have multiple segments of business. So we do have conventional aircraft, right? So TEXTRON Aviation manufactures Cessna aircraft and Beechcraft aircraft, and Bell Helicopter, of course, produces both commercial and military rotorcraft, right? Regardless of whether they're conventionally powered or focused on more sustainable options like our business segment, there's a commitment across TEXTRON, across industry, to continue to work towards more sustainable solutions. So let me give you a real-world example of what that looks like at TEXTRON Aviation, where I sat as part of the senior leadership team for 12 years. So first of all, you all have probably heard about sustainable aviation fuel. So our products are certified to be able to use sustainable aviation fuel. When we fly to a convention like BASE in Las Vegas, we're using every single day sustainable aviation fuel in our demonstrator fleet, right? And we offer sustainable aviation fuel to our customers when they take delivery of aircraft and when they come into our 11 service centers across the U.S. We can't mandate what a customer does, right? At the end of the day, the consumer makes the choice. And I think the biggest challenge is that the cost of sustainable aviation fuel is still higher than Jet A. But we don't stop at just the aircraft operation and the fuel burn itself. Many of our products actually have eco-friendly and sustainable solutions in their interiors. So we're using repurposed materials, we're using completely sustainable materials, and offering those to our customers who, again, have the opportunity to make that choice. If we don't offer them, they can't make that choice, right? And so we find it's really important for us to make that part of who we are each and every day. And then we also, in our cost of operation programs, do offer to customers the opportunity to add a carbon offset program into their operations. So from an operations perspective, from an aircraft perspective, we continue to move forward in what we think is the right direction to continue to press towards the industry standard of more sustainable solutions. But the last thing I'll say is that we have significant footprint of operation within Kansas. And I'm proud to say that our facilities are powered through renewable energy, specifically wind generation. And so we're looking at across the entirety of the value chain, and we also engage our team. So there's a sustainability team who influences and brings to the table ideas that haven't yet been implemented in terms of ways that TEXTRON Aviation, as a traditional aircraft manufacturer, can continue to contribute to more sustainable solutions. At the same time, obviously, TEXTRON sees the benefit of moving towards, net zero operations if the technology allows it, which is why there's a R&D focus in our segment specifically on, electrification. We have the Velis Electra that sits out here on Embry-Riddle's campus. It's the world's only certified aircraft, along with continued R&D in battery development as well as hybrid technologies.
Just to add to that, she covered a lot of ground there, but I think even operationally beyond being sustainable, there is a lot of work and celebration put into big wins. So we do track not just what do our airplanes do in the customer's hands, but the whole, how do we build our products and get them out to market? And we track how much water does that require, how much chemical usage was there, how much energy requirements were there at all of our facilities. And if you don't measure, you don't understand it. And then once you start measuring it, you say, wow, that facility uses a ton of water. And there's been huge, once you put a light on it, probably started 2015, 16, 17, major reductions in the type of resources that are consumed by our TEXTRON, and it's just gigantic. So just knowing and measuring goes a long ways to going, hey, there's probably a better way to do that process or build that thing to where we can, not consume so much as a manufacturer. And so the employees get really excited about it, the finance guys get really excited about it because it costs us less money to build the things we're building. But overall, it is something that is tracked across the enterprise and work. And the good news on the airplane side is where sustainable solutions or efficient solutions will exist, the market will be. Your operation costs are highly affected by how much fuel or energy is consumed to get from point A to point B. So from the whole value chain from customer to the manufacturer and designer is highly incentivized to make it as efficient as possible. And that's where the innovation of technology tends to go on the engine side, the aerodynamic side, et cetera.
Last but not least, I would say as a publicly traded company, we publish in our annual report those metrics, as Nick mentions. We have ESG principles and metrics that we measure and report out to make sure our investors are aware of those things. There was.
I can just read it out loud.
Yeah.
Go.
Dean's got
Mr. Thomson, do you find that the laws and values surrounding ethics change often, specifically in America? And if they do policies kind of reflect that, or is it just kind of stay somewhat similar year after year?
So I think one of the interesting things, right, when you look in the United States and then internationally, and I've done work in basically every continent, the laws for the most part are pretty similar. They're not so dissimilar that you have issues. So there's not a lot that changes. There are some regulatory requirements that change, right? So supply chain is a good example. There are increasing requirements, particularly in Europe, around sourcing and where sources, conflict minerals, where are those coming from? Is slave labor used? Is some of the sanctions, for example, Russia, right, was not always on the sanctions list, and so we're not allowed to buy raw materials from Russia right now. And so those kind of change, but in general, luckily the principles don't change, because the best case scenario in business, you want to have sort of constants so that you can plan accordingly. It gets a little different when you're dealing with government contracting, where the government may today say, hey, you have certain obligations that you have to fulfill, and tomorrow you're not allowed to kind of fulfill those same obligations. But we kind of work through that. So in general, they don't change a lot, which is lucky because we can pivot if we need to. The COVID period was a real interesting time because we had state and then national and international things changing almost on a daily basis, and that took a lot of brain power to figure out, hey, if I have to get an executive from Rhode Island to Wichita and then to Canada, how do I do that? And there were all these sort of requirements. But in general, unless you're in a crisis period, things tend to stay pretty constant.
Do we have time for any more?
Good morning. This question isn't really ethics related, but I just wanted to know how kind of operations are affected when we have a government shutdown like we do right now.
That's a great question. I think first, of course, there are, through the OMB, certain aspects of the government which continue to receive funding and be operational. Things that relate to national safety, as an example. So, obviously, we need either commercial flights that are happening. We need ATC to be operational to ensure that those maintain safety, etc. But there could be aspects of aviation that are impacted. And so I don't want to speak to what is, because I think that has not yet been published. But if you go back to 2018 when the last shutdown happened, you'll get kind of the OMB register, and you can see kind of what the operating plan is and what will be impacted. And so one thing that has been impacted in the government shutdown in the past has been the opportunity to register aircraft. So the FAA does not staff, registries. So that could impact, and it could impact a publicly traded company, because if we can't register an aircraft that has been in the production flow and is now ready to be certified and go into the hands and go through its title change to its customer, that has a real and material impact potentially. It has an impact to our customers who can't take delivery of that aircraft, and it also impacts the resale market where the pre-owned transactions can't happen. So there are definite impacts that can be felt, which is I think why we're all hopeful that this is resolved soon. Anything you guys would add that you've seen?
Definitely experienced 2 shutdowns as a program manager for certain programs, and all things stop. Right. And the funny thing is, it kind of continues beyond the restart, because I've had, they didn't pay their phone bill, so you can't have a conference call or something like that and get them and try to restart the program. So it not only does it, the employees stop working on key projects and high priority initiatives, whether they be safety or just new aircraft certification, but they kind of stumble back into work. So it has a wide range of effects. From just doing business to much, probably individual effects to individual employees of the government. So it does impact how we do business.
Any more questions?
All right, again, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your engagement and attention.
I'd like to thank Mr. Shortt, thank you, Mr. Thomson, and Mr. Begley. Thank you so much. You all have a great day.